Nobody inside the paddock expected the numbers to look like this. For years, Ducati's data systems shaped the very foundation of modern superbike racing: hyper-detailed telemetry, finely tuned aero concepts, and precision electronics that transformed velocity into mathematics. Their bikes were testaments to engineering dominance. Yet every time the analysts sat down to compare their perfect lines and optimized braking traces with those of one rider, the models broke apart. The predictions didn't hold. The theories collapsed. The margins Ducati believed were unbreakable were shattered. Because one rider kept doing something that shouldn't have been possible. Toprak Razgatlıoğlu, whose corner entry technique didn't match any known template, had become the world's most unpredictable variable. A human anomaly. A rider whose braking mastery defied everything the algorithms were built to measure. And according to those who saw the telemetry firsthand, the truth behind this mismatch told a far more complicated story than talent versus technology. A story Ducati never wanted uncovered. What appeared from the outside as simple late braking was something the paddock couldn't categorize. Engineers described his entry phases as elastic, as if he could stretch time itself. Rival crew chiefs whispered that he felt grip other riders didn't even sense. And on track, the results were undeniable. He attacked corners with a fearlessness that looked reckless until you saw the precision underneath. Yet behind garage doors, Ducati's analysts were stunned. Every overlay, every comparison, every attempt to quantify his moves revealed inconsistencies that had nothing to do with Yamaha, BMW, or any machine he touched. What they saw looked like controlled chaos: brake pressure curves that didn't flatten like typical riders, fork compression values that refused to follow predictable trends, and weight transfer patterns so extreme they appeared closer to stunt-riding traces than racing data. The more the engineers studied, the more uncertain they became. Because nothing in Ducati's system explained how someone could brake that late and still turn the bike with such stability. And the first person to realize this anomaly wasn't a rival rider. It was an engineer who thought his sensors were malfunctioning. But when the tests were rerun, the truth became even more baffling. And that's when Ducati realized something inside their perfect models had begun to fracture. For Ducati, everything begins with numbers. Their braking zones are designed around stability, calculated down to the millimeter. Aerodynamics distribute downforce to keep the bike planted. Electronics cushion the strain. The system is elegant, efficient, predictable. But Toprak's corner entry strategy didn't respect any of that. Every braking trace from him looked like a violation of the natural order Ducati spent years perfecting. Where their riders eased pressure progressively, he snapped into the brakes with force, held unbelievable load on the front wheel, then released pressure as if letting the bike breathe in mid-flight. Ducati's models insisted those techniques were unsustainable. Yet every weekend, Toprak made them look effortless. Inside the factory setup rooms, disagreements quietly formed. Some analysts claimed the data was incomplete. Others believed the sensors weren't calibrated to such extremes. A few, more worried, suggested the models themselves were limited, that human adaptability had outpaced the algorithms. But nobody was ready to admit the bigger fear. What if the data was accurate? And Toprak was simply performing beyond Ducati's theoretical limit. The only way to find out was to attempt something risky: replicate his braking markers with their own riders. But the results would leave the entire Ducati camp unsettled. In a private test session, Ducati riders were shown a simulated projection of Toprak's braking points. The goal was simple: see how close they could get. Not to imitate him entirely, just to understand the magnitude of the difference. But as soon as they tried, confusion erupted. One rider returned to the box shaking his head. Another asked whether the reference points were incorrect. A third simply said the markers felt impossible, not unsafe, not unrealistic, but unreachable. Ducati's sensors confirmed it. Toprak wasn't merely braking later. He was modulating pressure with a finesse that contradicted how their bike, and most modern superbikes, were designed to operate. He shifted his body in ways that unloaded the rear wheel and rebalanced the chassis entirely through instinct. He drifted the rear early, not as a mistake, but as a deliberate method to pivot the bike. His fork compression reached depths that other riders avoided, yet his stability readings remained eerily controlled. It wasn't just late braking. It was a technique no simulation model had ever accounted for. Some engineers believed they had discovered a breakthrough. Others saw it as a threat to the stability-driven philosophy Ducati had refined for nearly a decade. But this technical revelation would spill into the psychological battlefield next. Riders aren't machines. When someone rewrites the limits, everyone feels it. Toprak's braking transformed grid dynamics in a way nobody anticipated. Rivals began pushing deeper into corners, searching for margins they weren't ready to handle. Crew chiefs warned that chasing those markers would disrupt race strategy. Yet riders couldn't ignore the reality. Toprak was reshaping the sport's understanding of corner entry. Fans noticed too, social media flooded with debates. Was his mastery a once-in-a-generation instinct? A biomechanical advantage? A riding philosophy Ducati couldn't decode? Inside the Ducati garage, the strain intensified. Analysts faced pressure to explain why optimized data struggled against human unpredictability. Riders questioned whether they should adapt their own styles or trust the system that had always guided them. Whispers in the paddock suggested that Ducati feared a narrative forming, that straight-line power was no longer enough to suppress a rider who could steal time in the most delicate part of a lap, the approach to a corner. And then a new layer of truth emerged. One that had nothing to do with hardware. Because the real secret to Toprak's braking wasn't purely mechanical. When Toprak's data was finally analyzed with fresh eyes, something unexpected surfaced. His technique wasn't built around the bike's limits at all, it was built around his body. Years of unconventional training gave him a unique mastery of balance and drift. The micro-movements he used to stabilize the bike weren't visible to the naked eye, but sensors caught them. Tiny shifts in weight, rapid changes in grip modulation, and a level of brake control that seemed intuitive rather than calculated. He applied pressure aggressively, yet released it with a grace that kept the chassis composed. He allowed the rear to dance but never lose purpose. He manipulated momentum like a sculptor shaping motion. And because Ducati's algorithms were designed around predictable patterns, these organic variables appeared as data noise, irregular, inconsistent, and beyond the system's comprehension. Some insiders admitted quietly, Toprak wasn't breaking the rules of physics. He was exploiting areas Ducati's models didn't explore. But when Ducati responded with new upgrades intended to close the gap, they discovered an unintended consequence. Because technology had a limit, and Toprak didn't seem to recognize it. Ducati doubled down on refinement, new aerodynamics, adjusted downforce profiles, sharper electronics, and braking stability enhancements. On paper, everything improved. The bike became steadier, more controlled, and more predictable in corner entry. But those improvements created a paradox. Stability, Ducati's greatest strength, made the bike harder to maneuver with the kind of aggressive weight transfer Toprak used naturally. The bike's predictability, its hallmark, restricted the extreme body inputs that defined his style. As one insider put it, you can't paint like an abstract artist using a ruler. Some engineers feared the truth. Ducati might have engineered themselves into a system optimized for predictable excellence, yet vulnerable to unconventional genius. Riders tried to push the new upgrades past their design philosophy, but the bike resisted. Crew chiefs warned of diminishing returns. The paddock whispered that Ducati's search for perfection had left them less adaptable to riders who didn't comply with the model. And the tension reached its peak when the championship fight tightened, forcing Ducati to confront what they had long avoided. As the title battle intensified, Ducati's obsession with decoding Toprak escalated. Lap after lap, they compared braking zones, corner entry deltas, and pressure curves. Engineers mapped every trace, every anomaly, every flicker of instability they could exploit. But data alone couldn't calm the growing uncertainty. Inside some garages, disagreements intensified. Should riders abandon their refined style and chase Toprak's chaotic brilliance? Should engineers modify setups to encourage a technique their bike wasn't designed for? Or should they trust the numbers and dismiss Toprak's mastery as unsustainable? Each perspective carried risk. Riders felt the psychological strain more than anyone. For every meter Toprak gained under braking, Ducati riders pushed deeper, and every deep push carried consequences. According to rumors, meetings grew tense. Riders wanted answers, engineers wanted obedience, management wanted harmony. Nobody wanted to say it aloud. But the moment of truth arrived at a race where everything was exposed under the harshest spotlight. High pressure makes cracks impossible to hide. In a pivotal race, Ducati and Toprak met corner after corner, each time approaching the braking zones together. And every time the same pattern emerged. Ducati's riders reached their limit. Toprak pushed further, and the difference was unmistakable. He attacked the corner entry with ruthless precision. Ducati riders attempted to mirror him, some overshot lines, others hesitated. The data captured after the race showed a shocking detail. Ducati's theoretical braking limit was still above Toprak's real-world markers, meaning the engineers had calculated a deeper potential. But only one rider on the grid could reach those depths. Fans declared it proof of pure instinct triumphing over machinery. Analysts called it the clearest demonstration of human unpredictability. Ducati, however, saw something more troubling. Because if their models were accurate, and Toprak could exploit margins none of their riders could reach, then the issue wasn't the bike, it was the philosophy behind it. Inside Ducati, the conversation changed. Whispers grew into debates. Debates grew into disagreements. Some engineers defended the data. Others argued the system needed a fundamental redesign. A few believed Ducati had prioritized mathematical perfection over human adaptability. Riders felt increasingly cornered. How could they match a style that wasn't mechanical but instinctive? How could they challenge a rider who shaped physics to his will? And how could they trust a model that didn't account for the unaccountable? Pressure built from inside and outside the garage. Media questioned the philosophy. Fans questioned the riders. Management questioned everything. And then, at the moment of peak tension, something unexpected happened. A twist that rewrote the entire narrative. When Toprak moved to BMW, many in Ducati watched closely. If his braking advantage came from Yamaha's characteristics, it would disappear. If it came from electronics, it would shift. If it came from setup philosophy, it could be neutralized. But none of that happened. From the first serious testing laps, a familiar pattern resurfaced. BMW's data analysts saw the same anomalies. The same late entries. The same weight transfers. The same impossible braking traces. Different bike. Different engine. Different geometry. Same Toprak. And that was the moment the paddock finally understood. His mastery wasn't a quirk of machinery. It wasn't an electronic advantage. It wasn't tied to Yamaha's stability or BMW's stiffness. It was human artistry, unpredictable, unrepeatable, unprogrammable. A riding philosophy that broke the boundaries of engineering logic. Even today, Ducati's analysts continue refining their models, searching for patterns that can explain him. Rival riders keep asking how one person manages to stretch the braking zone like a dimension only he has access to. And engineers across the paddock adjust their philosophies, trying to bridge the gap between human instinct and mechanical perfection. But no matter how deep the analysis goes, one question remains unanswered, a question that defines the entire saga. How do you engineer a response to a rider who rewrites the limits every time he touches the brake?